any differently than he did. He seemed very proper and respectful. I don't know, this whole argument where it's characterized as sexist just was lost on me. But again, that's just me. Jason Rantz joins us right now. The Jason Rantz show host on KTTH out in Seattle. And Jason, I thought the argument was insulting, and not only to the vice president, but to the senator. And I thought they both comported themselves well. They were aggressively going at each other. That's fine. It had nothing to do with gender. It had nothing to do with mansplaining or otherwise. Just my thoughts.
Yeah. Neil, I think you're totally right. I mean, this shows you the pernicious nature of sexism coming from the side that likes to say that they're fighting against sexism. This is a debate. They're supposed to have some general interruptions. They're supposed to correct each other. They're supposed to pose questions to one another. But the assumption is, when we're doing this whole mansplaining thing, and allow me to mansplaining to you, another man, for a moment, I think that's okay, is that you're assuming that because she's a female candidate, she's not capable of handling a normal and rather tame debate, certainly tame in relationship to the first presidential one. And I think that you're starting to see folks set Kamala Harris up right now for some defense in what they believe to be some of her faults. I think when you saw some of the back and forth, for example, on Law and Order, which I think Kamala Harris was actually saved a little bit by The Fly, because that's when The Fly was sharing the stage with Mike Pence, I think she did not do very well. And we saw some of this earlier on yesterday during the day where, she did this interview with Hillary Clinton and they were going back and forth and getting some tips. And it was picked up by some folks in the media like NBC News saying, yeah, you know what, it's going to be a lot of sexism here. I suppose the one positive to all of this is that they didn't scream racism in addition to sexism. So I think that might be glass half full.
But you know what's weird about it, Jason, is they would both interrupt each other. Apparently people who follow this with a stopwatch said that, the vice president went over his time limitations, was interrupted more than was Kamala Harris, 15 times versus 9 for her. But having said that, would we be even talking about this if he were interrupting a man, or vice versa? We're interrupting a woman. I just find it a little bit offensive. And when you're going to talk, as I was switching around to see what others were saying, hard to do when I'm handling Fox Business's coverage of this. This idea that he ducked questions. Well, I was keeping a pretty fair and balanced read of it. They both ducked some questions, but it was almost as if that never happened in her case, that she never pivoted, and only he pivoted. See, that's what's not right. I mean, I understand people have their biases and see things through the prism of their politics. I get it. But it's incumbent on us as journalists covering this to just go straight down the middle. All right, X number of interruptions. Who, dodged a question. There was plenty of that to go around, having nothing to do with gender and everything to do with some politicians who were being crafty as they could be.
Look, I think obviously this time around we've seen more of the media, generally speaking, picking sides than we've had in the past. I get it. They don't like Donald Trump, and so they especially don't like Mike Pence, who, does come off presidential and did a really good job last night. So they're doing whatever they can to sort of needle at this administration and at this campaign. And I don't even think it's a question of whether or not two men were up there and doing the interrupting, because we saw that obviously last week with the presidential campaign, and They obviously took issue with that. But if two female vice presidential candidates were up there, they would be acting the exact same way as we saw Mike Pence and Kamala Harris act. Again, this is part of debating. And I'm so sick and tired of just this condescending attitude towards anybody who comes from a protected class when they're being treated literally the way that they're supposed to be treated. There was nothing overtly mean-spirited about the debate performance by either side. They were political. And yes, you are correct that they both dodged some significant questions. I think obviously it's up to the individual voter where they stand on the certain issues as to whether or not some of the dodging was a game changer for them. But I mean, the idea of dodging, for example, on abortion. We know where Mike Pence stands on abortion. This is not breaking news that he is pro-life. And we also know where the Democrats and Kamala Harris stand on abortion. For me, some of the questions have more to do with court packing. And I do think that even though the Kamala Harris camp and Joe Biden camp don't want to have the conversation about court packing, and maybe they think keeping it a secret is going to play better for their base. I do think that every single time that they're asked about it and we get this sort of extended, I'm not going to answer the question, it does shine a giant spotlight, and some people are going to start to say, like, why? This seems like a pretty simple question for you to ask. What are you hiding?
Yeah, just to answer it. I just think that when I was reading a lot of the newspaper reviews on their respective performances, a lot of saying, well, the vice president was badgering her. I didn't see the badgering her. They both kept their voices low and calm. Kudos to both of them. But the idea of badgering once again raises this idea of mansplaining or being condescending. She's a woman. I didn't get or see any of that. And I think it just minimizes and trivializes the whole debate process when we see it only do gender roles here. Just keep track of balls and strikes. Who scored points on issues that mattered? I think Pence's line of questioning on whether she would approve of packing the court or even get rid of the filibuster, as other Democrats have raised, was absolutely legitimate, as it was for her to go zero in on what the president and by extension the vice president knew about the severity of the virus earlier on, and hold them both accountable. Gender having nothing to do with it. It insults Americans, I think.
If she did a great job last night on the substance, they would have been talking about the substance. And so I do think that it's worth noting they're not really talking about the substance and instead talking about the style. And anyone who has, even seen any interview or any debate with Mike Pence, for anyone to say that he was coming off as badgering is just super bizarre to me. I mean, this is a guy who's so even-keeled. His tone is so consistently respectful, even when he's delivering some of his biting remarks. So I just don't think that plays. And it's funny because last night I was watching your guys' coverage, and Frank Luntz over at Fox News was making the point that he had this panel of undecided voters from some swing states, and they, on style, they slammed Kamala Harris. They thought that she was essentially a little bit too smarmy and condescending. And so for today, the news to be, oh, no, actually, the condescending person was Mike Pence, again, I think is just part of a strategy that's pretty transparent to go after this particular campaign.
I think we're way beyond playing the sexist drill and seeing everything through that prism. It insults the vice president. And by the way, it insults
2020
Kamala Harris. It is amazing, but it is what it is. That's a popular line this year, isn't it? Jason, thank you very much, my friend.